Hello, everybody. This is Noah Sunday-Lefkowitz live at his keyboard. This is the very first episode of Medlin Around. That's Medlin with one D, like the word medley, because I make medleys. Get it? Not meddling like I'm messing things up. But maybe we'll mess things up because this is the first episode of my podcast. I swore for years that I would never make a podcast because the market is so oversaturated, and who needs another white guy talking, right? But I have a Patreon, and I've wanted to offer Patreon something exclusive and fun and kind of lax. You know, historically, the kind of content I make is very high effort. Every time I record either a cover or my own music, I have to record the piano, record the vocals, edit those together, film it, edit that together. And not to say it's difficult. I've gotten into a routine now after almost 3.5 years, but I've wanted to do something a little chiller, a little more informal. So here we are. We're going to talk about anything from Disney parks to musical theater to social media to making my medleys, making my original music, my time working at Walt Disney Imagineering, and especially for this first episode, I had no idea what I wanted this first episode to be, and so I thought that I would just make this episode as if I was being on somebody else's podcast. So I'm going to talk a bit about me, where I came from, what I do, how I do it, why I do what I do, and just get you to know a little bit more about me and where I am and what I do. I assume if you're listening to this, you are on Patreon, so I wanted to thank you because I couldn't do anything of what I do without Patreon because I gotta live somehow. And if you're on Patreon, I have to assume that you know a little bit about me, or at least care about my content, so, thanks again for that. But this episode is just going to be a deep dive into who is Medley Guy. So I'm going to start talking, and we'll see how long it is. I really have no idea how to do this. So let's just start at the beginning and see where this thing goes. I'm going to say right now, there are two things that run consistently parallel in my life story, and that is Disney parks and musical theater. So I'm going to do my best to tell those stories concurrently. So I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, just outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania, the home of The Office, Joe Biden and Cole, and lived with two incredibly loving and supportive parents. My dad's a pharmaceutical salesman, and my mom's an occupational therapist. And as a kid, I very quickly showed interest in music and performing arts. And so my parents put me in choirs from when I was 3 and violin lessons from when I was 3 or 4. I used to get big pretzel sticks and pretend I was playing them as a violin. So my mom was like, well, let's do that. And so I got into violin and played violin until I was 15. Now, all the while, I was blessed to be in a position where we could travel to Walt Disney World every year, sometimes for my dad's business trips, sometimes just for fun. And so I was integrated into the theme park world from a very early age. I do not remember ever not being a part of my life. I remember actually as a child, I used to think that the parks were 24 hours because looking back, even though we used to go at rope drop, I never recalled it ever at any of the parks ever being closed. I say any of the parks, we would go to Walt Disney World. We were in Pennsylvania. We'd take the 2.5 flight straight south, and we'd go to Walt Disney World, and it was beautiful. And I remember the parks never felt closed. I would get there and they'd be open, and then we'd leave and they'd still be open as a kid. And so I always assumed they were 24 hours. Did anybody else have that? But we went to Walt Disney World every year, and I just sort of fell in love and just took it for granted that this has always existed. And I would dream of going back there when I was a kid, when I would be in school and everything like that. And while I was in school, I was doing all this music stuff, all of this theater stuff. Eventually, as I came into more of my conscious state, I realized that I really wasn't learning the type of music I wanted to learn on violin. I loved learning about music. I loved music theory. I loved playing music. I loved singing. But I was learning classical music, and as like an 8-year-old, it wasn't really my MO. And so I started teaching myself guitar. And I actually, interesting fact, I taught myself guitar by watching guitarists on TV and mirroring their image. So as a result of mirroring the image, I learned how to play guitar upside down. So to this day, I still play guitar upside down. And it's just because I would watch Tom Chapin and Raffi play on my TV, and I would mirror the image, and I would flip the guitar upside down so that it, you guys know what a mirror does. And so I started learning guitar, and I eventually got a guitar teacher. And around the same time I got a guitar teacher, I got a keyboard, and I started teaching myself keyboard. And so eventually my guitar teacher turned into my piano teacher, and I loved this guy so much. He was a very unorthodox teacher. He would come to our house, which first of all was great and convenient for me. But this guy, he was like an old hippie guy from like the 60s, 70s, I guess 70s. And he would ask me what I wanted to learn. He didn't give me sheet music or classical music. He saw that I had a background in music and knew music theory already. And so he would ask me, what do you want to learn? And being a kid who was obsessed with the Disney parks and would go every year and, loved the movies and everything, I said I wanted to learn Disney music. I wanted to learn Disney music, Disney parks music, Billy Joel, and Elton John, because that's the music my parents played in the house. And I grew up loving soft rock and piano-based rock. And so this piano teacher started teaching me all this Disney music, and he taught in a very particular way, in the sense that he wouldn't hand me sheet music. He wouldn't even hand me sheet music to some songs that clearly did have sheet music, very famous songs. But I would ask to learn like the Goofy movie. I remember learning, one of the first things I asked that I wanted to learn was the songs from a Goofy movie. And especially in the early 2000s, you couldn't find that sheet music anywhere. And so we would put the movie on, and he taught me how to learn to transcribe music from listening to it, to do music dictation. And I remember being fascinated by that, because suddenly the idea of learning music wasn't gatekept by somebody else writing and printing sheet music. I was able to do it just by listening. And so this teacher taught me how to train my ear really well. And so we would listen to these songs from a Goofy movie or from the Disney Parks CDs. And I would learn all of this music by listening to it and deciphering the chord progressions and deciphering the key and deciphering the melody. And as we did that more and more, as a musician, I started to notice patterns in songs, chord progressions, melodic turns of phrase that were used. And I started to realize that certain chord progressions, certain patterns conveyed different emotions consistently. All these, sad songs are in... Oh, my keyboard's off. Let me try that again. Sad songs are like, they could be in minor keys. Why? It's like, I don't know what that means necessarily, but I know that minor sound sad. Or like, Alan Menken does the raised fourth in his songs, a lot of this. And that conveys a sense of upliftingness and hope. And whenever I hear that, I feel that, and I wonder why. And I recognize these patterns, and at a certain point, you say, well, I notice all these patterns. I can make these patterns. And that's how I started writing music, is just like breaking down music to learn enough and realizing that it's just puzzle pieces. And I can put puzzle pieces together in a semi-interesting way. And that's a simplified version. But that's how I started writing music. And I started writing music consistently when I was maybe about 14, 15, just silly songs, just nothing of note. I wasn't destined to be a singer-songwriter, but it was just, another skill that I learned. But That's when I was 14. I want to jump back a few years just to fill in some gaps, because we got the Disney story and the music story running parallel. We would go to Walt Disney World every year. When I couldn't go to Walt Disney World, I would watch the Travel Channel because YouTube was in its infancy, so I watched Samantha Brown's Disney Favorites and things like that. And I was obviously also really into Disney films. I remember even as like a 5, 6, 7-year-old, I was really interested in animation, not just as a product, but as a process. That distinction is a consistent factor in my life, is just always being fascinated with process as opposed to product. I wanted to be an animator for a long time. I would be taking art classes. I would always draw Disney characters. But very quickly, I learned I didn't really have the patience for that. And something else that I loved in the animation world was claymation, stop motion animation, specifically Aardman Animation, the people behind Wallace and Gromit. And so I really took to sculpting. I really took to claymation. I started making claymation short films. Before I had a computer, I would just have a little digital camera and just flip through the pictures really fast. Professional animation is 24 frames a second. I would get maybe 6, depending on how fast my thumb could click. But I would make this, and it was more than it was an obsession of mine. And eventually, a side note to a side note, as a kid, I was a child model. So I had a child model agent, and I would do little magazine photo shoots for children's clothes or toys or things like that. But that was before I had much consciousness. I don't really remember much of that. But at a certain point, my agent at the time knew that I did animation and said that there was an audition happening for PBS Kids for 10 kids across America with unique talents. And my parents were like, oh, well, Noah does this claymation. That's certainly not typical of a child, and they're very supportive. And so we drove to Philly and I auditioned, and I do remember the audition. I remember the vibes of the audition because I remember I was so confident in my own abilities as an animator, as a sculptor, that I just went into the audition room and told them all about my clay. And it's so funny because looking ahead, I've always been a very nervous auditioner. And yet when I'm talking about something that I'm passionate about, that I never feel any nerves about. And which is maybe why this podcast will work well, huh? But I ended up getting cast as one of 10 kids across America with unique talents. And PBS came to our house outside of Scranton and filmed a little interstitial about me called Show Us What You Got, Noah, where I showed off my stop motion. And that was played for like a decade on there. And so every once in a while, I like to go on social media and be like, hey, you remember this commercial? That was me. But eventually, I realized I just didn't have the knowledge of physics enough to keep doing animation. I didn't have the interest to learn physics. I was really into the art form, but not the physics side of it, the like engineering side of animation. So after a few years of doing it, I just sort of faded away from it naturally, not for any particular aversion to the love of it, but just I didn't have that side of my brain wasn't wanting to work that hard. But conveniently, around the same time, around ages 10 or 11, I remember this moment very well because this is one of the key moments in my life. I remember reading a Walt Disney World trivia book in Wegmans grocery store. It was Walt Disney World Trivia Volume 2 by Lou Mongello. And one of the questions was, how are the ghosts in the Haunted Mansion achieved in the ballroom scene? The answer, of course, being Pepper's ghost. And in that moment, a light bulb went off because I realized that the thing I love so much, these Disney parks, these illusions, these rides, these attractions, these shows, are made. When it said, how are the ghosts made? How are the ghosts achieved? I was like, oh my God, people make this. Because like I said, I had assumed it had always been there. It was like the Colosseum. Like I can't fathom a world with this not existing. And in that moment, I'm like, oh my God, there are people who build this. There are people who make ghosts for a living. That's so cool. And literally from that moment on, I was obsessed. I was obsessed with learning what Walt Disney Imagineering was, the people who create, design, and construct the theme parks. I was obsessed with the Haunted Mansion. I was obsessed with Yale, Gracie, Rolly Crump, and Illusioneering. And just that is my life changed. I started recreating special effects from the Haunted Mansion in my yard for Halloween. I used my skills as a sculptor to recreate the singing busts. The singing bust was like my first love with Imagineering, because it combined my love of sculpture and my love of creating a themed environment, something that would perpetuate now until today. I would film myself in a vise, and I would project the image onto the clay. Then I would sculpt the clay of my face and align the projector and then project on, just like they did back in the 60s. And I remember, similarly to loving the parks as a travel destination, I started watching the Modern Marvels of Walt Disney World in 2006, because that was the real only documentary that talked about Imagineering. You know, not if I had grown up now and the Imagineering story was available, I can't imagine what would happen. That's what's happening with the youth these days. I'm sure there's some youth listening. But I would watch these videos and watch these very rudimentary recreations on the internet back in like 2006, 2007. And I'd be like, wow, as a 12-year-old, I'm really making some things that are of good quality. And so I've made now, in the course of my life, like 4 or 5 different singing busts. And I was just endlessly fascinated. I started reading all the books, start reading the Imagineering field guides, those little skinny books that looked like the Hidden Mickey books, but they were nerdier. And I would bring them to the parks, and I started looking around at the rock work of the parks and the brickwork and the storytelling and all the things that made this environment so special. And Imagineering just became my passion, so much so that when I was 13, I wrote to Imagineering. I don't even remember how, but I found their email somehow, and I wrote to Imagineering and saying, hey, I'm a 13-year-old from Pennsylvania. I'm a musician and an animator and all these things, and I would love more than anything else when I grow up to be a Walt Disney Imagineer. And I included a list of every book I had read about Imagineering and every documentary I had ever watched about Imagineering. It was a silly long list, but I was really intent that would help. And wouldn't you believe it? I don't know if it was just because of the moment in time that I wrote to them or somebody had a free day, but I got a response back. I got an email back from a guy who, his name is Dave Fisher. I don't remember his exact title, but he's high up in the story department, and he wrote back saying, thank you for writing. You know, this is Imagineering. We have over 150 different disciplines. We design and build the theme parks all across the world. And he gave me some advice, which I took to heart and is now the same advice that I give whenever anybody asks me on how to become an Imagineer. And what he said was this: I see how passionate you are about the product, about the theme parks. That's amazing. We love anybody who's this passionate. That being said, a passion for the theme parks does not guarantee you a job in the themed entertainment industry. We do not necessarily hire people because they are huge fans. We hire people who are at the top of their skill set, who we can then use to put their skill sets to use at Imagineering. So rather than hiring the biggest Disney Parks fan or Disney history buff, which I believed I was at the time, we're going to hire the best engineers, the best graphic designers, the best people for spreadsheets. We will hire people who are the best at their field to then put them to work working on theme parks. So he encouraged me to find those skill sets that I was really good at, find the skills I'm passionate about, get as much experience in those fields as I can. He encouraged me, go to school for it, take classes in it, do hobbies, do professional things, get work experience, internships, whatever you can do to gain knowledge in those skills. And he said, maybe with any luck, you can use those skills at Imagineering. And I took that immediately to heart. And surprisingly, I wasn't disheartened at all, because it made total sense. Because loving Disney is not a professional skill. It's an amazing hobby that I still do to this day, but my skills were in music and theater. And so because of his support and encouragement, I doubled down. I was in all the school productions. I was like, I'm going to do musical theater. Because that is what I'm good at. I'm good at music. I'm good at theater. I've started now writing. Now I'm caught up to when I was 14 from like 10 minutes ago. And I started writing music more. I started being in more shows. I didn't know how that would apply to Imagineering, but I knew that was what I was good at. I couldn't be an engineer. People assume Imagineers are all engineers. I am the furthest thing from an engineer, believe me. And so I ended up going to college for musical theater. I went to a small liberal arts college in Allentown, Pennsylvania, called Muhlenberg College, and I got a degree in music and a degree in theater. And it was there that I realized, oh, I want to be a writer too. And I looking back, I realize it's because growing up, I was cast as the lead a lot in shows, and I'm sure, many of us listening who are in music and musical theater professionally was that big fish in a small pond. And yet when I got to college, as many people's experience is, suddenly everybody is as good as you. Suddenly, everybody does the same thing as you. And I realized very quickly, I got to get a gimmick so that people can know who I am. And I started writing musical theater as well as performing because, like I said, I learned how to pick apart music from my piano teacher. And so I started writing musical theater. And I said, well, what do I want to write? I want to write a show. I had never written a show up until that point. I'd written songs, for crushes or things like that, or for my big, 14-year-old emotions. But I was now 18 or 19 in college, having, gone there for a year as a performer, now wanting to get into writing. And the big, everybody says, write what you know. And what I knew, surprise of the century, was Disney and Disney history. And I have always been passionate about Walt as a person and Roy specifically, Roy Disney as a person. I am so passionate about Roy Disney. He does not get the credit he deserves. And I ended up coming up with an idea to write a show about the relationship between Walt Disney and Roy Disney, told from Roy Disney's perspective. And I still think it's a good idea to this day. And I started writing this show. I met a friend. She came on as a dramaturg, ended up being co-lyricist, and we started writing this show. And I started using my passion about Disney and my skills as a musician together for the very first time. And it was so validating and so fulfilling to put these things to the test and put these things together. And I ended up writing with my writing partner at the time, Emma, who I just mentioned. We wrote a full 2-act show. We didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know we should have started small. And so we wrote a full 2-act musical with like 18 cast. And we would do readings. We did 3 readings of this show. Once sophomore year, once junior year, once senior year. And the show was in vastly different state of completion. Every time there were new characters, there were new plot points, and I certainly learned what I didn't know about writing musicals. I learned that I cannot write a script to save my life. That is what a good collaborator is for. And we wrote this show, and I'm still really proud of it. And I've never released it because it's the first show I ever wrote, and it's very clunky, and I can see the learning process when I listen to it or when I read it. But there are still pieces of that show that I think are really good, especially as a writer. And one of those songs is the song Carousel, which I've played at my live shows. I've posted on my social media, and it's the moment where Walt Disney sits at Griffith Park watching his daughters on the Griffith Park Carousel and dreams of Disneyland. And I'm still really proud of that song. That was like baby's first I Want song that I had ever written. And it was just this perfect combination of something I was passionate about and something I knew a lot about. And I was writing for a character that was passionate about a thing and really wanted something. He wanted more. I wanted more. It was a match. It was the right place at the right time. Now, in the middle of my college experience, I did the Disney College Program. I remember seeing a poster for it when I was on a choir high school trip. We were singing in a college, and I saw a poster for it when I was like 16, and I was so interested in it that I took the poster, and I think that poster still exists in my childhood bedroom. But I did the college program my junior year of college in the first half of 2017. I was parade audience control on Main Street, USA in Magic Kingdom, and I believe that I had the best possible experience at the college program. I am not going to make a whole podcast about my college program, but maybe I'll do a whole episode on the college program. I don't know. You tell me what you want me to talk about. I'm going to have guests on here. I should have said that at the beginning, but I'm going to bring people on here. What do you want to hear me talk about? What do you want to hear me and other people talk about? Maybe one day I'll talk about the college program. There are a lot of podcasts that talk about the college program, so I'm not going to do that right now, but I had the most amazing experience as a 21-year-old theater kid. There is nothing better than standing on Main Street every day working parades and fireworks shows, and when they weren't going on, just talking to families about Disney World. It was the perfect job for a nerd like me. And for what it's worth, I actually worked the last 100 shows of Wishes, the show that I grew up on and made me fall in love with the power of fireworks shows and fireworks show music. I worked the last 100 episodes, the last 100 shows of Wishes, and got to work the first 2 weeks of Happily Ever After, a show that, like Wishes, changed the game of nighttime spectaculars, and I would consider to be like the pinnacle right now. I love both of those shows. Wishes has a special place in my heart, and Happily Ever After is just the cornerstone now. And so I got to witness that. I got to watch Michael Young, the creative director and team, come into the park to work on it when I was leaving, in the weeks leading up to the show premiere, and it was just so much fun. But I didn't do a lot of professional navigation while I did my college program because I was in school for musical theater, and I didn't know if I was going to pursue becoming an Imagineer because I was getting a degree in musical theater. And I assumed that after college, I was just going to graduate and move to New York and be, one of many suffering artists and trying to put on my own work and auditioning for shows. And that's what I assumed. So I just had a really good time on my college program. If you want me to talk more about that, I can at a later date. But I got back to college my second half of my junior year, did another production of my Disney show called My Brother Walt. And then my senior year, another thing happened that changed my life. My friend Andrew, who was in school with me, who also loved Walt Disney World, also loved Imagineering, asked me if I wanted to do something called the Walt Disney Imaginations Competition. Now, I had been a self-proclaimed nerd of Imagineering, read every book, can tell you what books have wrong facts. I was, in school from middle school until that moment was known as the Disney guy, and in college was the kid with the Disney show. I'm sure we can all relate to being the Disney kid. But somehow this thing called the Walt Disney Imaginations Competition had completely fallen through the cracks. I had no idea what that was, and Andrew explained to me that it was a competition set up by Walt Disney Imagineering, in which Imagineering puts out a prompt for college students to create and design a theoretical immersive experience based on that prompt. And Andrew and I looked it up, and we and our school qualified. It was a team. You can be a team of 2 to 4 people. And we were 2 people who wanted to be Imagineers, and so we applied. The prompt that year was to find an abandoned location in America and propose a revitalization of it as a design experiment. Obviously, Imagineering is not going to build our ideas, but we found an abandoned mining town of Kennecott, Alaska, and we made a whole pitch deck. We made a whole presentation. I give Andrew so much credit for pushing us through this project. And we just submitted it, and we went through a bunch of the rounds, and it was amazing. I will say, like, I'm really proud of us because we're both theater students. I'm a music composer and performer, and he was a theater designer. And we had no engineering background, nothing like that you would assume is necessary for Imagineering. But above all, we knew that we wanted to have story be at the forefront of our pitch, at the forefront of our experience. So for all that we lacked or didn't know that we didn't have, we wrote a really strong story. Andrew made some incredible visuals. I wrote an original piece of music. And we ended up being in the top 6 finalists out of over 270 teams. And Imagineering flew us out from Pennsylvania along with the other 5 teams to California, to Imagineering, to pitch our ideas, to pitch ourselves, and get tours of the buildings, of the parks, of the animation studios. It was insane. It was a life-changing experience. And we got to interview for internships. The Imaginations competition is a way of Imagineering finding the next generation, of finding new interns. And so I interviewed with a bunch of people, and long story short, ended up getting an interview with a guy named Jeff Moskowitz, who is the executive creative producer of the Disneyland portfolio. And long story short, he offered me, eventually, an internship as a producer intern for the Disneyland portfolio. First of all, that's insane because I'm a theater student, but also I'm a theater student. What am I going to do at Walt Disney Imagineering? I had no idea. And the word producer to me as a theater person means money. And I have never been on that side of theater, so I was like, I really don't know what's going on. But Jeff, incredible person. He also came from a theater background. He was a parade performer in Florida. We bonded over that. We bonded over our theater background. And so he promised that means something different in themed entertainment. And so I ended up moving to California for a 3-month internship in the late summer of 2018. And I was a producer intern for the Disneyland portfolio. And suddenly, having graduated 3 months prior, am now a 22-year-old working at Imagineering. Dream job with a degree in musical theater. And I got to work on amazing projects like Pixar Pier and Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, a bunch of things that never made it through to the table, but I got to work with people that I admired and read about for my entire life. Joe Rohde, Kevin Rafferty, oh my gosh, like I was just in heaven. And because I didn't really know what I was doing there as a theater student and didn't know how long I would be there, I used that time to just talk to everybody. I got coffee with everyone, and I now encourage everybody to do the same because I learned so much just from sitting down with anybody who I was working with, just being like, hey, can you tell me a little bit about your experience? I don't know what I'm doing here. Can you tell me how you found yourself here? Maybe I can find what I do. And I made so many friends, so many colleagues, so many coworkers. It was really just a joy. Of course, my friends, my intern friends at the time always joked that my job that I was getting paid for was to sit and have coffee with people. But I made a really strong connection with a bunch of folks, and it was great. And I eventually got extended from 3 months to 6 months, 6 months to 9 months, 9 months to a year. And then it was time that I could potentially get hired full-time or not. And I ended up interviewing with a bunch of people saying, hey, do you need somebody here? Do you need somebody there? Because again, I'm trying to figure out where I fit in. I was very passionate about the product that I was working on. You know, I was so insanely proud to be working on Disneyland, a park that I had only got to visit once as a conscious human being. I say conscious human being because technically I was there in 2001, but I was 5 and I have no recollection of it. But I was there once in 2016 as just like, you know, I did the pilgrimage out there once during summer vacation once, and I never assumed I would ever be back. But here I am 2 years later after that trip working on it. But I really wasn't sure where I fit in. You know, I was working as a producer intern, taking meeting notes and helping organize scheduling and stuff. but I wasn't really using my skills to its fullest potential. And obviously, you're an intern. You're never going to be doing that. But I was really fascinated to see if there was a place that I could feel just as passionate about my part of the work as I was about the work itself, because I love the theme parks. Why do I need to keep saying that? You're listening to this, you love the theme parks too. But I ended up, long story short, I say long story short, this is my own podcast. I played the piano. Did you hear that? It's off again. That's what a piano sounds like when you can't hear the keys. I ended up being hired as a creative coordinator for live entertainment development. And when I started meeting with the live entertainment team, I suddenly realized, oh, that's where all the theater people are. Because when I had first gotten there, I was in an office. I was in cubicles. And yet when I went across the street to the live entertainment team, those were all the people who moonlit as choreographers, who wrote on the side, who were directing regional theater, and they're also Imagineers. And I was like, oh, these are my people, these creative, crazy, loud people that work on a tight budget and a tight timeline. Those are the theater kids. And so I worked under an amazing executive creative director named Dan Fields on the Avengers campuses, both in California and Paris, respectively. I worked on the web Spider-Man attraction and worked a lot on the development of the live entertainment experiences, the live shows, the stunt shows, the meet and greets, and got to do a lot of character research, which was really, really fun. And I did that for a while and then eventually moved over to my job that I was at for the longest time, which was in the casting department. And that's the closest thing I found to my skills, because I had been a performer all my life. I've been doing voices all my life. The first voice I ever did was Donald Duck, which is an insanely weird choice as a 10-year-old to start learning and start just like, I don't know if that picks up on the mic. I'm out of practice. Do I need to give excuses? It's my own podcast. But I was doing voices all the time, and I actually met the casting director when I was an intern, 6 months prior or whatever, because I had recognized his voice and I didn't know how. And then I realized that he was the guy who hosted the Voices of the Disney Parks panels at the D23 expos in the past. And even though I had never been to an expo at that point, I'd watched all of those panels on YouTube and I had heard his voice and seen him. And so I would hear his voice in the hallway and I'm like, I know your voice. Because again, as a musician, just to toot my own horn for a little bit, I have a pretty good ear. I can pick up that stuff. I can mimic people pretty well. As a side note, talking about mimicking, my voice teacher all throughout college and high school into college, was very anatomy based. It was something called the Estel, The Estel School? The Estel Society? I don't remember. It's the Estel way of teaching voice where it's anatomic based. It's not about feel like you have a golf ball at the back of your throat. It's like, no, lower your larynx, tilt your thyroid. And so because I have this intimate knowledge of how to move the different muscles in my throat, I tended over time to be a very good mimic. And so I of the myriad of things I wanted to be when I grew up, I wanted to be an Imagineer, I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a performer, I wanted to be claymation animator, also wanted to be a voice actor. I idolized people like Corey Burton, who, I don't need to tell you what Corey Burton is, but maybe I do. He did the Mad Hatter. He's Dale from Chip and Dale. He's the Ghost Host in Haunted Mansion Holiday. He's the Magic Mirror. Did I say that already? I don't know, but he's the Disneyland and World parking lot tram. He's every pirate that says the word Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. I could go on and on. He's Ludwig von Drake. Corey is insane. He's my idol. And he was also the voice of the Disney read-alongs on cassette and CDs that I used to listen to. And so I met this casting director trying to bring it all around, and we hit it off just as friends. And I realized that he, as the casting director, is the only person in the casting department. This one man, Brian Nefsky, is holding down the fort for the last 30 years, casting all the English-speaking voices in the parks, all by his lonesome. And so I don't remember if he came to me or if I came to him, but he was eventually like, I need some help. Do you want to work with me? And so I ended up working with Brian in the casting department. And that was amazing. I still wasn't performing, but I was working with actors, working with writers, working in the booth with these people. And I got to work with these idols that I admired. We got to bring in Jim Cummings. We got to bring in Corey Burton. We got to bring in all of these voice actors that I had just idolized. And I got to watch them. I got to work with them. I got to do their paperwork. And it was amazing. And I developed such a close friendship with Brian because we were two guys sitting in a broom closet. And unlike many other capacities in Imagineering, where you work on 1 to 3 attractions or experiences for maybe like 3 to 6 years, the casting department, the casting piece of the timeline in any particular project is very specific and very fast. And yet it's extremely vital because whatever you record for that 1 hour in the booth is going to be played more or less every 30 seconds for the next 30 years in the park. And no matter what you do at your desk as a designer or an engineer or whatever for those 5 years, whatever choices that actor makes in the booth is going to be a direct connection to the guests. They are going to know that recording, And just like music, it's like nobody walks away humming the architecture. The things people remember viscerally are music and voices. And so I felt an incredible amount of pride working on this stuff, and we got to work on 5 to 10 experiences per week, a lot of the times changing week per week. So while I can point to a few attractions or lands that I worked on in live entertainment or on the Disneyland portfolio, there is just too long of a list to say any attraction that I worked on in the casting department. Now, if you're thinking, Noah, you're 40 minutes into this podcast and you still haven't talked about what you do now. Well, we're just about there because after just under 3 years of working at Imagineering, something very strange happened in March of 2020. And a bunch of us, most of us, got furloughed from Imagineering. And then eventually, a lot of us got laid off because of that little pandemic we had. And it was a very sad time because I had been in this crazy position where I got a dream job at 22 years old, moved across the country, and now I'm 24 or 5 at that point and lost it. And I had so heavily identified as an Imagineer. I had such pride in it that I'm like, oh, well, who am I now? What do I do now? And I had this big crises of, oh, well, yeah, I guess I still wasn't actually doing the things that my skills are in, so I guess I should do that. But at the same time, my writing partner had gone a separate way for musical theater, and so I now had all of the work that we had done together was sort of up in the air, and I was at a very big crossroads. But like a lot of us, we were inside and started making stuff for social media. And I realized that I should use this opportunity. I pursued and had my dream career already, which is an incredible thing that I can't believe I get to say. But now I think I should pursue the other dream, the dream of music and theater and performance and writing. And yet we're all stuck inside. And I have all these connections at Imagineering. I would still love to write music and do voiceover for Imagineering. I had all of these pieces up in the air, and we were stuck inside. And so I was thinking, well, what if I started recording stuff, just covers, voices, stuff to put online, so that I can start to change my old coworkers' perception of me and what I do. Because no matter what your degree is in, if you're an intern and you're a coordinator, you are seen as a coordinator. It's not a bad thing. It's just real. Nobody asks you, so what do you really do? Unless you're sitting down to have a heart-to-heart. And what I really do is music. And so I wanted to create what I keep now calling for the past 3.5 years a living, breathing resume. I wanted to put my work online so that if I wanted to get a job as a music performer, I could point to a bunch of videos online and say, here's some examples. If I wanted to get hired to write a song, here's 10 songs that I wrote online. And I started to put this stuff on the internet, and eventually I had made some videos that did, fine. But then my partner, Taryn, said to me that Defunctland was having a talent show competition in 2021. and I should do something for the talent show competition. And I thought, oh, well, I should make a Disney Parks medley. Now, I need to interrupt myself to just say that medleys were not a new thing for me at this point. In middle school, I had written a bunch of medleys of Elton John and Billy Joel music. I'd perform them at talent shows, and actually my first standing ovation I ever got was at an Elton John medley. Because other than Disney music, what I loved more than anything else was Billy Joel and Elton John. Some of my favorite things still to play are Billy Joel. My favorite song is Billy Joel's Miami 2017. See, I should play more on this podcast. That's the intro and outro to Miami 2017. But anyway, I had done a bunch of medleys, and so Taryn encouraged me to write a medley. And so I wrote a medley of Disney Parks music. It had to be 3 minutes long. That was the qualification for the video for Defunctland, and I put it in, and it was eventually showed on a live stream and voted on by the public, and I won. And so I put it up on socials pretty much the moment it won, just because I was like, okay, people like this. That's nice. And it was my first video that went somewhat viral. And almost immediately I was like, oh, I get it. Medleys are interesting to people. And so I started thinking of other medleys I could do. I had never wanted to do medleys of like Disney's greatest hits or something. All great and valid medley topics, but they've been done. You know, we all are very familiar with the videos in the 2010s, great medleys from Nick Patera, John Cozart, and I just didn't want to do a lesser version of them. You know, they set the standard for that, and so I really wanted to make medleys that were like the next layer of nerddom, right? I wanted to make medleys of the music that I liked, the nerdy stuff that really got me going. Obscure Disney Park songs, old Epcot songs, songs from direct-to-VHS sequels, things like that. And so I made, along with Taryn's help and a colleague, mentor of mine, Richard Kraft, we created obscure Disney songs A through Z. And it's a gargantuan medley, like a 6-minute medley. And I posted that, and that went truly viral. That was the first video of mine that went over 1 million views and got incredible amount of comments. And through those two medleys, I realized that medleys work online because they are rapid fire. They are like 5 to 10 seconds of a song and then gone. So from a keeping an audience engaged standpoint, it's great because it's just here's a new thing. And also, if I am making obscure medleys, if I'm making medleys that are more challenging, have songs that are more challenging to identify, I can gamify this. I can make it into a challenge. See how many of these songs you can recognize. See how obscure your knowledge really is. And actually put real obscure stuff. That's a pet peeve of mine, by the way, is when people say, oh, here's an obscure medley. And it's like Poor Unfortunate Souls. I'm like, get out of here. And so I use like Ugly Bug Ball, The D Show, songs from James and the Giant Peach, things like that, and things that even maybe I didn't know, or things that I knew but nobody else remembered, things like that. And because it was so deep dive and was posed as a challenge, these videos started doing really well. And before you know it, I've started making medleys into a brand. And so now I'm known as the medley guy. And now I have a podcast called Meddlin' Along. Meddlin' Around? Something like that. I don't know. It's new. I've been making content for over 3 years now, and like I said, it's always been a living, breathing resume for me. I've always tried to make content that showcases my skills. I've not made any lifestyle content, or even I try to limit the fun facts videos I make in the parks, because I'm not a guy who wants to make in-parks content. You know, there's a cavalcade of other great creators that do that, and I love watching them, and I love partnering with them. But that's not really what I do. I'm a musician. I want to be hired as a musician. All of this stuff is to showcase my work so that I can eventually be hired back at Imagineering to do music or to do voices. And when I say back at Imagineering, I just mean writing music or doing voices for themed entertainment. And slowly but surely, as I've put all this stuff online and tried to maintain a brand and tried to stay giving out professional content, both arranging other people's music and starting to fold in my own original music because I want to showcase more original songs with, I'm writing songs for attractions that don't have songs. That's always been really fun. I love the People Mover song, Western River Expedition song, my Soarin' song. If you haven't listened to those yet, I implore you to check them out because they are some of my things I'm most proud of. But through doing this and through maintaining the vision that I've set for my social media as a living, breathing resume, in the last few years, I've gotten the opportunity from my old colleagues and other people in the industry who have seen my stuff. They've reached out to work with me for music for themed entertainment, which is incredible that this is starting to happen now, that I'm now working. I've done super secret music project with Imagineering, and I've auditioned and gotten cast as voiceover at Imagineering. And that's, I think it's because I've really tried to stick to my guns of changing the people's perception in the industry of me and what I do and try and put it out consistently. I post a video every Sunday. I have missed less than 10 Sundays in the last 3 years, and I'm really proud of that because in my experience, if I give myself any leeway on any sort of schedule, I will just stop. I need to be very, very strict with myself as I post every Sunday. Sometimes it can be a really high production 6-minute medley, or sometimes it can just be me talking about a thing. But I need to post every Sunday because it creates a consistency. And in the last year or so, I've been really excited because I've finally started doing live shows. That's been amazing. I sort of hit a ceiling around the 3-year mark, or maybe the 2.5-year mark, where I was like, okay, I'm getting consistent engagement from this stuff online. I think I have a great community here, a really positive community. People like what I do. I love what I do. I love interacting with the community. I think the way to move forward with this is to bring it out of the digital space into a physical space. And so I put on a live show in Anaheim, and it sold out. Granted, it was free, so that was easy. But all the tickets disappeared, and I did this live show, and it was incredible. And it is just now, it feels like the culmination of, I am a live performer at the end of the day. What I talked about 45 minutes ago is that my passion and my skill set is in Disney parks music, and music writing and performance. And so to finally get to the point where I am now putting on shows is insane, that I'm putting together all of these things. And I did another show in February in Florida, and I actually sold tickets this time, and that also sold out. And that was amazing, and I got to meet all the fans in Florida, and you guys are so nice. And I'm planning another show in August for Anaheim again. Stay tuned for that. I have some great music coming out in May, June, and July. I've got my first original single coming out in May that's going to be on streaming. People ask me all the time, why can't you put your medleys on streaming? I don't own the rights to the Disney songs, and I don't want to get in trouble. I'm trying to work with Disney. I want to stay on their good side. But, maybe one day. But I'm putting out my original stuff out there. I'm going to put out an album later this year. I'm going to put out my song Carousel that Walt Disney sings from my original musical. I'm going to put that out on streaming. So much so that when I do my show in August again, it's going to be like a whole new show. So all of this to say, that's my whole life story. It's now been 53 and a half minutes of my whole life up to this point. And it sounds like I'm at the end of this story, but I still have no idea what I'm doing. I still am taking jobs wherever I can as a voice actor, as a composer, as an arranger, because I'm just trying to do what I love. I'm no longer a full-time employee anywhere. I'm a contract worker. I'm a gig worker, and that's what musicians do, and I'm thrilled to do that in that way. So yeah, that's about where I am. That's Noah's life story. I don't know. Is that interesting at all to anybody? I figured I would get this out of the way so that we would all have an understanding of who I am and what I do, so that from this episode on, I don't have to talk about it. We can dive deep into Disney Parks hot takes, what I worked on there, what I'm working on now, new music I'm working on, music ideas, music opinions, theme park opinions, bring on experts and people who know nothing about things to talk with them. But please tell me what you would like to hear from this podcast, and I will do my darndest. If you want me, even if there's like a song or something that you want me to break down and talk about why I think it works, like I would love to do an episode on the Sherman Brothers and how the Sherman Brothers, writing in the 50s and 60s, are really doing 1920s music because it was nostalgic for that time, and why all this stuff really hinges on nostalgia, but how their music has like such an easily definable style and how that works, singable, simple, singable, and sincere. Talking about their theme park music, whatever. I can go on and on and on about so many different topics, but at the end of the day, I want you to tell me what you want to hear from me. I know I will be doing a Q&A episode soon, so if you have any specific questions you want me to answer, please write them in the comments somewhere, and I will answer them. In the meantime, join the Patreon if you're not here already. I don't know how you'd be listening to this if you're not, but maybe I'll put this out for free. I don't know. We're far in advance right now. I'm just making a cache of episodes. But that'll do it for Meddling Around. Thank you so much for supporting me, supporting my Patreon, supporting the arts, and I will see you next time with less biography and more discography. Does that make sense? I don't know. Hey! Meddling along. Nope, meddling around. I don't even know the name of my own podcast.